My name is Rachel Lewis, and I am writing this so my own voice will not go quiet. I live in Boston, America, in a brownstone my mother left to me when she passed. The deed lists only my name. People sometimes ask if I feel safe in a big house alone. I smile and say the house feels like a good winter coat, made to keep me, made to last. A realtor once told me it could sell for about $2,500,000. The number is large, almost silly, like a bright balloon tied to a mailbox. It floats in my thoughts now and then, but it does not run my life. A house is more than a price. It is the stair that creaks at dawn, the window that sticks in the rain, the door that shuts with a sure sound when the wind rises on our street. We buried my husband, Thomas, on a gray morning that made the whole city sound like it was whispering. The church bell rang slowly, as if it understood the pace of sorrow. I wore my mother's black coat and kept a white handkerchief in my sleeve because she always did. My friend Olivia held my hand through the service and pressed a peppermint into my palm when my throat went tight. Our lawyer, Daniel Reed, waited outside with a folder under his arm, his tie a little crooked, his voice careful and kind when he asked if I needed a ride home. The flag over the common barely moved. People came to hug me and say Thomas's name. I said thank you in a voice that sounded steady, and then I stood very still and let the day pass over me. At church, they called him Brother Tom because he helped anyone who asked, carrying boxes for the food pantry, fixing a low fence that sagged, giving rides to the clinic when a bus ran late. He had a way of nodding when people spoke that made them feel seen and safe. But he also carried a private truth, the kind that draws a line across a life. Years ago, after long talks and small tests, Dr. Helen Ward told us, in her office near the river, that Thomas could not have children. She said it with care and plain words. We left with quiet hearts and walked along the water. We decided to fill our lives with books, long walks, and small good things. We made peace with that truth and called it our map. I thought then that our story would be simple, even if it was not always easy. After the burial, I came home and hung my coat on the brass hook by the door. I stood in the front hall for a long minute listening. The old floorboards made their soft sounds like polite greetings. The clock in the dining room ticked a slow beat, sure and patient. I put a kettle on the stove and waited for steam, and when it came, I poured it over a tea bag in my mother's white cup with tiny blue leaves. On the counter, a stack of sympathy cards leaned against a bowl of apples. I opened one from my neighbor Grace, whose handwriting loops like ribbon. "I am so sorry, Rachel," she wrote. "Call me if you want company for a walk." I held the card to my chest and let the kettle hiss a little longer than it needed to. There were tasks to do, because there are always tasks. I called the florist to thank them for the lilies. I called the church office to confirm the gift Thomas wanted to make to the pantry, and I wrote a check for $200 with a slow, careful hand. I called the shelter in New York where he used to send his winter coats and promised to bring a box next week. Then Daniel came by and sat with me at the dining table to go over the papers. He explained what the will would cover and what it would not. He tapped the folder that holds the title and smiled when I said, again, that the house is in my name. We talked in plain terms, not because money is the center of grief, but because it builds the walls that keep the wind out when grief is blowing hard. In the afternoon, I walked to the bakery on the corner and bought a loaf of sourdough for $6 and 2 small tarts for $8 because sugar can be a bridge between heavy hours. The girl behind the counter, Leah, asked how I was holding up. "One step at a time," I said, and she nodded as if we shared a map. Outside, a light snow began, thin and soft, like ash from a cold fire. I carried the warm bread home in a paper bag and felt the heat through my gloves. On my block, Rob the mailman waved and handed me a stack of envelopes. There was a water bill, a note from Olivia, and a flyer for a yard service I do not need. I stood on the stoop and breathed in the bakery smell and the wet iron smell of snow and thought about the small, steady ways a day can be held together. That night, I did not sleep much. I walked from room to room, not to check on anything, but to remember. In the study, the reading lamp still wore Thomas's fingerprint in dust. He always forgot to wipe it. In the kitchen, The jar of jam he liked stood open, and I closed it and smiled, then cried. In the bedroom, his watch lay in the dish by the window, still and quiet, keeping yesterday's time. I do not know how long I stood there, only that I felt my heart beating in my wrists. The city outside was a hush. Somewhere, a train moaned. I lay down before dawn and watched the ceiling turn from dark stone to pale milk and told myself to breathe. My sister, Megan, is due any day now, and the thought of a new baby drifts through the rooms like a small, bright bird. I had planned to bring her a soft blanket and a tiny hat. I still will. Blood is blood, and babies are not to blame for the weather in grown hearts. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I will go to the hospital when I get the call. I will stand in the bright light and say the right words. I will hand over the blanket and hope it carries some part of the kindness this house has given me. I hold close the truth Dr. Ward gave us years ago and the care Thomas showed the world, and I try to let both truths live side by side. Before dawn, I sat at my desk and opened a blank page. I wrote the words after the funeral, and then I kept writing. A story can be a rope ladder. Each sentence is a rung you can step on when the floor shifts. I wrote the pieces I could hold. The coat hook, the kettle, the lily smell, the check, the bread bag warming my hand, the snow, the watch in the dish. I did not try to solve love or fix loss. I left room for what I do not know. I kept my words simple, because simple is strong. Maybe one day I will cross the ocean to Europe for a week and stand by old stone, but my life is here, in America. For now, I will sweep the steps, make tea, pay what needs paying, and keep my own door. The call came just after sunrise. Olivia's name flashed on my phone first, then the hospital number. "Your sister is in labor," the nurse said. Her voice was brisk, not unkind. I put on my coat, slipped the soft pink blanket into a paper bag, and added a small card that said, "Welcome, little one," in my neat, square hand. I locked my brownstone and checked the door twice, the way I do when my mind is busy. The street was pale with winter light, and America felt wide and close at the same time. I drove across the river toward the hospital. The highway was calm, the kind of Monday traffic that keeps a steady pace. I parked in the garage and fed the meter. The screen blinked $18 and printed a thin ticket that curled like ribbon in my hand. I tucked it into my wallet and told myself to breathe. I was here for baby, not for a fight. I kept repeating that as I walked through the sliding glass doors into the warm, bright lobby where a little fountain buzzed and a Christmas cactus bloomed out of season. At the desk, a woman with a tidy bun and a name badge that read Kelly handed me a pass. "Family?" she asked. "Sister," I answered. "Maternity, floor 6. I took the elevator up with 2 men in scrubs and a woman holding a bunch of blue balloons. "Boy," she said to me with a proud smile. "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. When the doors opened, the hall smelled like hand soap and warm cotton. A TV in the waiting area showed a loop of clouds moving over a map of America. Megan's room was quiet when I stepped in. She was propped up on pillows, pale and damp, her hair stuck to her forehead. A nurse, Nurse Rivera, according to her tag, adjusted the monitor, then left us with a quick, professional nod. I set the blanket and the flowers on the table and moved a cup, so I would not spill it. "You came," Megan said. Her voice was thin. "Of course," I said. "Blood is blood." For a short time, we talked about little things. How the contractions felt, how cold the room was, how the baby's crib at home had a mobile with small silver stars. We held hands when the hard part hit, and we breathed together. I counted for her the way a metronome counts for a song. Slow, steady, kind. A few hours later, a new cry cleaved the air, high and raw and brave. The baby was clean and pink and furious at being born, and then she was quiet, heavy, and perfect on Megan's chest. I felt something loosen and warm inside me, the way sunlight loosens frost. I said, "Hello, small one," and touched one tiny hand with one finger, and the baby's fingers closed around it like a secret. A doctor in green scrubs, Dr. Mason Green, smiled and said, "She's strong." He handed Megan a form and left. When the room settled, Megan turned her face toward me, and I saw a look I know too well. Her eyes were sharp, her jaw set. She reached for a folder in the drawer and pulled out several pages. "Finally," she said, loud enough for the walls, "I'll take half the inheritance. My daughter is your husband's child, so I get half of your $2,500,000 house." She held up a paper. "Here is Thomas's will." For a breath, the air felt thin. Then I laughed. I did not plan to. It rose up from the shock, clean and unstoppable. I pressed my hand to my mouth, but it kept breaking loose. I laughed because grief is a strange door, and sometimes it opens onto a room you do not expect. "Really?" I said at last when I could speak. Color drained from Megan's face. "What's funny?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, and then everything. I sat down in the chair by the bed, so my knees would not shake. I spoke in a calm voice, the way you do when a glass is near the edge. "Megan, the house is mine. It was never Thomas's to give. The deed and the trust list my name alone. And Thomas could not have children. Dr. Helen Ward put that in writing years ago. You know this." I kept my eyes on the baby, who slept now, a small ship in a wide sea. Megan's mouth worked as if she had chewed something bitter. "He told me," she began, then stopped. "He promised me things." Her fingers crumpled the edge of the will. I held out my hand. "May I see it?" She hesitated, then gave me the paper. I read the words. It was a simple, standard will that left what he owned to me. No mention of the house, because it was not his. No mention of a child, because there could not be one. The date was recent, the signatures neat. The pages made a soft sound when I turned them, like pages always do when the truth is plain. "The law is clear," I said. "And the facts are clear. The child's father cannot be Thomas." I kept my voice gentle. "Whoever the father is, this baby deserves love and safety. But my house remains my house." I set the will back on her tray, straightened the edges, and folded my hands. Nurse Rivera slipped in with a smile that dimmed when she felt the air. She checked the baby's band and Megan's blood pressure. "All set," she said, her tone sweet and firm, the way a teacher ends a quarrel with a bell. When she left, we stayed quiet. The monitor hummed its even song. Snow tapped the window in small, patient fingers. I watched the baby breathe and let the minutes settle like dust in a beam of light. I stood. "I'll step into the hall," I said. "I'll call Daniel Reed and let him know you've seen a will. He'll want to make sure the file stays tidy." In the corridor, I dialed. Daniel picked up at once. I told him what Megan had said and what the will said, and he listened without fuss. "You're fine," he said. "Bring nothing. Do nothing. If needed, I'll send a letter. Rest today." His voice was calm, a clean table in a messy room. I texted Olivia. "Baby is here. Complicated. I'm okay." She sent back a heart and the offer of dinner. "Soup," I wrote. "I'll bring bread." I walked to the cafe on the first floor and bought a coffee for $3.50 and a plain bagel for $2. I ate standing up, not hungry, but steadying myself with each small bite. I threw away the receipt and kept the cup, warm in my hand like a hand I could hold. Back upstairs, Megan stared at the wall. I placed the pink blanket over the baby and set the flowers, $1.22 from the corner shop, near the window where the cold would keep them fresh. "I hope she has a bright life," I said. It was true. I wished it so hard my chest ached. "I'll go now. You need rest." She kept her eyes on the paint. I did not wait for an answer. In the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the metal door. I saw a woman who could stand and speak and keep her own keys. I thought about the will, the deed, the trust, and the true words we were given by Dr. Ward. I thought about how in America, a signature holds. I pressed the garage button, paid the machine, and drove home under a sky the color of pewter. In my wallet, the ticket lay flat, and in my pocket, my house keys knocked together like small bells. I knew, with a strange, clean certainty, that the door I would open was my own. Back in Boston, I met Daniel Reed at his office near Beacon Hill. The hall smelled like coffee and old leather, the kind of smell that says today we will read facts and not guesses. Daniel set a folder on the desk and pushed a box of tissues toward me without a word. He has a quiet way that helps the room feel safe. Outside the window, the gold dome caught a thin ray of light. Inside, the clock ticked like a small hammer. "Rachel," he said, "we will go slow." I nodded and folded my hands so they would not shake. He opened the folder. On top lay Thomas's will. Daniel read it line by line, pausing so I could follow. It was simple. It left what Thomas owned to me. That was the first truth. Then Daniel moved the will aside and drew out the deed and the trust papers for my brownstone. He placed them in a neat stack. "These control the house," he said. "Your name only. Title and trust. No one else." The black letters were sharp and calm. The dates were clear. He tapped the page with one finger. "No one can claim it." He explained each page as if he were reading a recipe. "This is the title history," he said, and showed how my mother's name became mine. "This is the trust schedule," he said, and showed where the property sat like a careful stone. "This is the sign and seal," he said, and pointed to the notary stamp. I listened. I asked small questions, the kind that help a mind stand up after a fall. "What if there is noise?" I asked. "We answer with paper," he said. "Paper is the quiet truth." He smiled when I told him the house was appraised at $2,500,000. "A lovely number," he said, "but the title speaks louder." Then he showed me something I did not expect. "These came to me after the funeral," he said, and he placed printed messages on the desk. They were between Thomas and my sister, Megan. I read them with my stomach tight and my jaw set. There were dates, there were plans, there were words I do not need to write again. The simple truth sat on the table like a cold glass. They had an affair. He cheated on me. I felt a strange split in my chest, like a door opening where a wall had been. It hurt, and it also brought a hard, clean air. Daniel waited. He did not rush me. When I could speak, I asked the next question. "Does any of this change the fact about the baby?" He shook his head. "No," he said. "You and Thomas saw Dr. Helen Ward years ago. Her report is part of the record. It says he could not have children. Dates matter. The report matters. Even if they strayed, the child cannot be his." He slid the report across the desk, so I could see the date again. It was years before the messages. The numbers held steady like nails in wood. I signed for few certified copies, so I would not need to bring the originals anywhere. The clerk charged $18 for the set. I wrote a check for $5,000 as a retainer because Daniel asked to be ready if more noise came. I watched the pen move and felt the odd comfort of a number I could control. Daniel said he would draft a short letter that sets out the facts, the will, the title, the trust, and the doctor's report. No anger, only paper. "If Megan or anyone else pushes," he said, "we will respond with pages that do not shout." I thanked him. He walked me to the door. I took the long way home, past brick and ivy and iron railings. I stopped at the bakery and bought a warm loaf for $6 and a small bag of rolls for $4. The girl at the counter asked how I was. "Better than I was an hour ago," I said. Outside, the wind blew hard from the river, and the sky was the color of tin. I tucked the bread under my arm and kept walking. Love can be real and wrong at the same time. That thought walked beside me like a quiet friend. I thought about Mercy. I thought about locks. At home, I made tea and set the papers on the dining table. I read them again, not to learn new things, but to let the truth settle into my bones. I put the certified copies in a fireproof box and set the box back on its shelf. I took out the small tin that holds spare keys and looked at the row of metal teeth. I did not change anything yet. I only looked and counted the way you count breaths when you are trying to sleep. Then I called Dr. Ward's office and asked for a fresh letter that restates the medical fact. The clerk said it would cost $45 to certify and mail. "That is fine," I said. "Send it today." I wrote a short note to Megan and did not send it. In the note, I said, "The law is clear and the fact is clear, and your child needs calm, not a fight over what is not yours." I folded the note and put it in the drawer with the wedding photos I am not ready to look at. I will not chase her. I will not stand in rooms where lies are the loudest voice. I wished, as I slid the drawer shut, that the baby would grow in a house where truth is spoken first. I wished it like a prayer. Evening dropped over the street like a soft coat. I turned on the porch light and watched the glass glow. This is my house. It is not a prize. It is a shelter I keep with work and calm. I paid the gas bill for $112 and the water bill for $38 and felt each number like a step up out of a hole. I wrote Olivia to say I was home and safe. I told Daniel I got the copies and thanked him again. I stood by the front window and looked at the city. Somewhere a siren wailed and grew small. Somewhere a train rolled through. I thought of Europe for a moment, just the word, like a place on a map that marks distance. Then I let the word go. My life is here, in America, in the brick and the wood and the steady tick of the dining room clock. The truth is not pretty, but it is plain. My husband was unfaithful. My sister was too. He could not have children. The property is mine. The paper says so. The law says so. I say so. I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and carried the bread to the kitchen. I sliced a piece, buttered it, and ate it standing up, warm and simple, the way a person eats when the hard part of the day is done. The next morning, I called a locksmith and changed every code and key. Marcus Hale arrived with a tidy tool bag and a steady manner. He walked me through new deadbolts and a keypad that lights up in soft blue. When he finished, I paid him $220 and wrote the new codes on a card I keep in the fireproof box. I stood in the front hall and tried each lock twice. The clicks were clean, final, and kind. I texted my sister, Megan, a short note that said I needed peace, and I meant it for the long run. I wished her child a bright life. I wished it like a prayer. But I drew a line and kept it. I kept the house quiet for a week. I moved through the rooms like I was learning the shape of them again. I washed the winter throws and hung them over the banister to dry. I made tea and drank it by the window where the glass fogs at the corners when the heat rises. I sorted the mail. I stacked sympathy cards in a ribbon bundle and put them in the desk. I placed Thomas's watch in a small velvet pouch and then in a drawer that I lock. I am not a museum, but I keep some things because they remind me that love existed, even if it broke. The house held me board by board. Legal tasks still came, but they felt smaller each day. Daniel sent his letter, a calm page that set out the will, the title, the trust, and Dr. Helen Ward's report. I read it once and filed it. I left the $5,000 retainer in place and marked the expense in my budget notebook with a thin green line. I paid the electric bill for $86 and the internet for $59, and I put a note on the fridge that said, "No decisions after 8 p.m. The rule kept me from late-night spirals. When worry knocked, I answered with paper and small chores, wipe the counter, fold 2 towels, set out clothes for the morning. This is how a day gets built when the big pieces feel shaky. On Thursday, I boxed up Thomas's heavy coats, the ones with deep pockets and big buttons, and carried them to the train. I took the early line to New York, not for shopping or noise, but to give the coats to the shelter he liked downtown. The ride was a ribbon of shore and brick and winter fields, and it gave my mind a track to follow. At the shelter, Janet at the desk remembered his name. We spoke softly about the cold. I left the box and walked east until the air smelled like salt. I sat on a bench and watched the gray Atlantic lift and fall like a slow breath. I told the water goodbye and thank you. Then I came home the same day, lighter by 1 box and 1 small weight. People asked if I would move to Chicago or Austin, closer to my cousins or to warm winters. I said no. This brownstone is more than wood and rules. It is the map I know. The stair that creaks at dawn, the kitchen light that hums before it steadies, the window that sticks and then opens with a patient shove. These are the lines that trace me. Maybe one day I will fly to Europe for a short week and stand by Old Stone, but my life is here in America. I belong to the streets that know my feet. I belong to the mailman, Rob, who waves with his whole arm and calls me Morning Ms. Lewis, even when it is noon. I belong to Leah at the bakery, who tucks the best loaf aside if I am late. Grief changed its shape. It stopped being a wave and became a tide that goes out and returns, softer each time. I gave myself small anchors. I joined the church pantry on Saturdays and spent $35 on canned beans and rice to stock the shelves. I bought a new smoke detector for $28 and installed it myself, standing on a chair while Olivia held the back of my sweater like a tail. We laughed when the test beep made us jump. I framed a simple landscape, a field under a wide sky, and hung it in the hall. The frame cost $15, and it looks calm. I set aside $50 each month for fresh flowers, because a bright vase on a dark week is not a luxury. It is a light. Sometimes I think about the word home as if it were a person. Home is someone who keeps your secrets and tells you the truth. Home says, change the filters and add salt to the soup, and call the lawyer back in the morning. Home lets you cry at the sink and then asks you to rinse the cup and face the day. I wrote my story at the dining table in the light of the brass lamp. I kept the word simple, because simple is strong. I wrote, my husband lied and my sister lied, and still the truth stood. He could not have children. The property was mine. The law agreed. The door closed. Then I wrote the next line for myself. Another door opened. The new door is small and steady. It opens onto quiet mornings where I sweep the steps and wave to Rob. It opens onto errands I can finish. $54 in groceries, a $2.75 bus fare when I am tired of walking, a $9 bouquet of daisies from the market, bright as coins. It opens onto evenings when Olivia comes by with soup, and we eat with the TV low and the streetlight making gold on the ceiling. It opens onto nights when I sleep all the way through, and if I wake, it is only to listen to the clock and not to argue with the past. It opens onto a woman who keeps her own keys and her own name. If you pass my street one day, you might see me on the stoop with a book. I will be the woman who learned to sit still without fear. I will be the one who nods at the runner, who thanks the kid who brings the trash cans back from the curb, who takes a picture when leaves turn like copper. You will know me by the way I look at my door, like it is a promise I made and kept. And you will know, if I wave, that I am waving from ground I own, paid for dollar by dollar, cared for with work and with calm. I kept my house. I kept my voice. And I am keeping my future, one honest page at a time.